Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Cole. It's Sunday afternoon, May 18th, and this will be the week 2 video for Political Science 1013 on the first 7-week schedule for summer of 2025. Okay, everybody, what we have coming up is our first exam on Friday the 23rd. I believe that's right, Friday the 23rd. 50 items, true, false, and multiple choice. It will be open for 24 hours, but you'll have 45 minutes once you begin to answer the 50 items. The exam is based largely on the class notes for Units 1 and 2. I wanted to talk about Unit 2 today. We had covered pretty thoroughly Unit 1 last time. Then there are 4 articles to be accessed online that will make up about 15 of the 50 items. So I wanted to talk about the Unit 2 class notes and those 4 articles before we get through today. All right. Unit 2 is about political parties and pressure groups. Those are organizations outside the government that try to influence the government. Okay, but they're similar, but they're different. For one thing, we only have 2 major political parties in the United States, but we have many hundreds or perhaps even thousands of pressure groups. So let's begin with political parties. Among the things that we do at the outset of this unit, we try to discuss what political parties do, some of their functions. They are a means of conflict resolution between the 2 parties, of course, and because there are only 2 in such a big country, sometimes conflicts have to be resolved within each party. And some of your readings for this week, one in particular, deals with that. In systems like ours, we generally organize the legislature along party lines. There will be a majority and a minority in each chamber of the legislature. Okay, right now, the Republicans have the majority in both chambers, the House and the Senate. And that means not only are they in the majority, but they're in the majority on each committee and subcommittee. So the chairs of all committees and subcommittees in the House and Senate this time will be Republicans. From a more big picture perspective, you might say that we have to have political parties because otherwise it's hard for us to make sense of the political system. Right at the beginning of the class notes, we use the example of student elections that you may have experienced, say, in junior high or high school. But these often boil down to popularity contests. So perhaps if we didn't have political parties in the real world, if you will, our elections would amount to little more than popularity contests. But if you know something about the 2 parties and what they stand for, this in and of itself helps you to cast an informed vote, even if you don't know all that much else about what has been going on. So for that reason, political parties are important. It might be hard for us to make sense of things without political parties. Now, the next question that arises is why only 2 major political parties? And we go through quite a bit of material in the class notes to clarify this. It basically comes down to the way we make the rules in the United States compared to what you might find in many other countries around the world. To elect members of the legislature, there's basically 2 ways of doing it. One way is in our House of Representatives, 435 districts, 1 winner from each district, sometimes called the first past the post system. But you can also do it by means of proportional representation, which we don't have in the United States, but we try to explain that in the class notes. And that has a great deal to do with whether you have only 2 political parties or more than 2. So please look at that very, very closely and be sure you understand. Then we talk about the history of the political parties in our country going back to the 1930s, when the parties took on the character that they have today, although they've undergone considerable changes in the meantime. This goes back to the presidency of Franklin D. Roosevelt and his and the Democratic Party's New Deal, so-called. Now notice, we break the parties down, we put together a roster of the kind of people who supported each side. And we also try to discuss the changes that have taken place in the meantime from the 1930s to today. And there have been considerable changes, although I think there's some continuity. We talk a great deal. You'll come to a point in the class notes, a section that's entitled Republicans and Democrats in the 21st Century, What's at Stake? And I spend quite a bit of time on that. One thing we say is that these days, recently, it's come down to a conflict between new money and old money. New money being the tech economy, and old money perhaps representing industries such as fossil fuels and agriculture. Okay. Now, it's true that many of the tech executives, and we devote at least one slide and some notes in the class notes to this, seem to throw in their lot with Donald Trump right around the time of the inauguration. And we discussed this in the class notes. It's still the case that Silicon Valley and Northern California as a whole, and the whole state of California, votes blue instead of red, Democratic instead of Republican. Whether the chief executive officer's point of view will do anything to change that remains to be seen. But that's been one very recent development in the party system with Trump being inaugurated for his second term. After that, then, we look at pressure groups. And whereas there are only two major parties, there are many, many pressure groups. One thing we mentioned is for every product made in the economy, for every profession or for every occupation, there'll be a pressure group representing the producers of that product or the providers of that service, or the people who practice that profession or are employed in that particular occupation. Okay. Very often, but not absolutely always, it's an economic interest that's being protected in the pressure group system. And we go through many categories of pressure groups and try to identify the leading ones for you. So some of them are much larger than others, although these only scratch the surface. There are more than likely thousands of them. But we discuss some of the major ones in the business sector, the labor sector, the agriculture sector, the tech sector, the professional sector, the phenomenon of governments lobbying each other, or state and local governments, or even foreign governments lobbying the federal government in Washington, D.C. Some groups describe themselves as public interest groups. They represent themselves as representing an interest rather other than a narrow economic interest, although that often will be met with cynicism. Okay. But there are many, many pressure groups, thousands of them perhaps. Perhaps the main activity they engage in is called lobbying. In fact, pressure groups used to be called lobbies, but the term fell out of favor. Lobbying simply means contacting a public official and trying to persuade that individual to your point of view. We often think of it in terms of a lobbyist representing a pressure group approaching a member of the Senate or the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. Lobbying often is viewed as corrupt, but professional lobbyists would tell you their main job is to provide reliable information to that member of Congress. In fact, lobbyists and members of congressional staff do similar work, research by and large. So there's quite a bit of movement back and forth between staff within Congress and the staff of pressure groups working from outside to try to pressure the government. Okay. Pressure groups also engage in advertising and public relations and contributions of money to political parties and individual candidates. Okay. And we talk a little bit about the laws governing this, okay, at the very end of the class notes. Depending on the type of pressure group, they may be regulated by the IRS or by the Federal Election Commission. And there's been scandals about this from time to time. There was one that I mentioned in the class notes going back to the Obama administration. But the rules and regulations were changed somewhat by a Supreme Court decision called Citizens United that we will be talking about in more detail later in the course. So, those are the class notes for Unit 2 in a nutshell on parties and pressure groups. looking at those four articles we've asked you to look at. And everyone, if you could, if you've not done so already, please go ahead and try to access those articles. You may want to print them out. And contact me if you're having any trouble reaching those websites so that we can take care of it well before the exam. Okay. One article is called How Latinos Elected Trump. Everyone, when Trump first ran in 2015, 2016, it was speculated that the votes he would get would be nearly 100% from white Anglos. That has turned out not to be the case. And that in itself is a very important blow to the Democrats who were counting on the votes of racial and ethnic minority groups. So that's an article worth looking at, and I hope you will look at it closely. We then have an article by John B. Judas from the online publication Compact. Basically what he is doing is looking at public opinion surveys since Donald Trump has been inaugurated to get some idea of how he and the Democrats are doing, where they stand with the public. Okay. Then a couple of articles about the Democrats and the Republicans. We have one by Harold Meyerson about divisions within the Democratic Party and discussions among Democrats about what they ought to do now. The final one is by Molly Ball of the Wall Street Journal. And everybody, I mentioned to you, you can access Wall Street Journal articles through the McKee Library website. I believe I've sent you a gift link that should work for you with any luck without even using the library website. But you have a couple of alternatives on how to reach that article. Well, what Molly Ball says is that Republicans traditionally have supported the free market in economics, and that always included free trade. But as we know, Donald Trump doesn't see it that way. He's imposed tariffs. He's viewed as a protectionist. So how do Republicans in Congress feel about that? How have they responded to that? That's the point of her article about the Republicans and free trade. Okay, everybody. Those are the class notes for Unit 2 and also the little look at the articles we've asked you to take a look at. The exam, once again, will be Friday for 24 hours, 50 items, 45 minutes once you begin the exam. On Saturday, I'll be getting some material out to you for the second exam. So take it easy and study hard. Contact me with any questions, problems, or issues. When you take the exam, you can click on quizzes at the left of the course homepage and you'll see a link to exam 1. Or go to modules and under unit 2, there will be a link to the exam as you scroll down. All right, contact me with any issues, problems, or questions through the course website or at david.cole@opsu.edu. And we hope you do well on the exam, and we'll be talking to you once again about a week from now at this time.